Okay, so this is gonna be a redo of yesterday's video, um, with a little bit less foul language this time, I guess. Just kind of going over, hey, my Rx8 won't start, and what to look for to hopefully help you troubleshoot. The first and most common thing, obviously, is if you turn the key and nothing turns on the dash. You're looking at battery, whether it be the terminals or don't have a good connection, the grounds are crap, um, the battery is dead, or you have a blown fuse. You can see my door light and my immobilizers flashing every couple of seconds. That's normal. That just means my anti-theft is working, and obviously the car door is open. If you go and you put the key on and you turn it to engine on, and let's say your immobilizer light starts flashing like twice a second or so, it does like a rapid flash, your key's not recognized and or programmed, and that's why your vehicle will not start, because you've triggered the immobilizer. You want to make sure that the chip, the RFID chip, and your key is still good, and make sure you're using a key that's programmed to the car. It's the only way you're going to get past that. If you don't have a programmed key, you better get one. Let's say the immobilizer is just doing the regular thing, you're not triggering it, and you go to turn the key and the car doesn't want to start. It's not even trying to turn the motor over. The first thing that I would look at is going to be the clutch switch. So there's, on your clutch pedal, you're going to have two different switches. Let's see if it'll focus right here. We are going to have, there we go. So you have this switch right here. That switch is going to be for cruise control. So whenever you push in the clutch, it disengages, and that's how it knows to cut off your cruise control. The other switch is going to be the starter circuit. And for that starter circuit, what it does is the battery feeds 12 volt constant to your starter, and it always is going to be there. I'll do a separate video on my battery relocation showing that 12 volt constant that the starter gets. But this switch is a circuit for a trigger wire to actually engage your starter. So when you push your clutch down, that plunger gets depressed, it closes the circuit, and when you turn the key, it's a closed circuit, it triggers your starter to go ahead and crank the car over. So assuming your immobilizer is not kicking in, that will let your starter spin. If your starter's not spinning when you turn the key, you want to take a look at this switch, make sure it wasn't accidentally kicked or damaged in any way. It doesn't hurt just to look and make sure that that's not causing an interruption in your starter circuit. Again, that's going to be the trigger wire for the trigger circuit for your starter switch. It gets 12 volt constant direct from the battery. So, moving to the engine bay and things to look for of why your car might not be starting. The car is super filthy, sorry. Haven't washed it in a long time. Weather's been garbage, and I've been in the process of moving. This is my daily driver, and I live out by some airports and oil fields, so it's always really badly dusty. But anyways, normally it sits right over here, but since I've deleted my air pump and done some other stuff, barometric sensor. Make sure that the plug's in there, it's secured, you got a good signal. This is going to be critical for the computer to determine air density as part of the fuel injection table, on how much air it has to inject based off of various factors, including temperature, air pressure for the density, etc. That's my coolant tank, don't worry. But normally on the bottom, underneath the air pump, which is normally down here, you have your fuel injector relay. Make sure your plug is fully seated on that. Make sure your relay is okay. Or I'm sorry, not a relay, this is your resistor. I just relocated mine over here because I did an air pump delete, and I wanted to route my coolant tank's coolant lines over this way. So moving forward with other things to check. I don't like the vacuum caps that people put on the lower manifold service ports. The reason why I don't like them is sometimes from putting them on and then removing them off, removing them from the service port, they get torn on the very end of it, and that results in a vacuum leak. So what I like to do is I actually will take vacuum tubing and I'll bridge between the two service ports, so that when I go to remove it, I just pull on the hose itself and I don't, damage or crack or put a hole in the line, resulting in a vacuum leak. And two, it's a lot easier to source a section of vacuum line than it is to go through a bunch of vacuum caps to find the appropriate sized one. Again, this is the 2004 model, and it does not have the revision that changed how the oil line goes from the oil fill neck to the in front of the throttle body. And I did an oil catch can setup anyways, but just make sure you don't have a vacuum leak there at the lower manifold. Speaking of vacuum lines and vacuum leaks, another thing to look at, whether you have a automatic or manual 4-port or 6-port, you are going to have a secondary shutter valve and a variable duct valve or intake valve. So the VDI and the SSV. One is up here. You can see me pushing the actuator right back there, and one is right here. They have vacuum lines going for each of them, and those vacuum lines come back here, route under the upper manifold, and connect back here to underneath the upper manifold to it's almost like a small little block. I don't know, I can't think of the name of it right now, but point is it goes there, and it'll pull vacuum from the upper manifold, and that's how those valves actuate. These lines can sometimes get loose and come off. I'm actually going to be replacing my line soon because I'm going to be taking the upper manifold off, preparing my motor for turbo. So check these lines on the actuator side and on the solenoid side underneath the upper manifold. Make sure everything is seated and that you don't have any leaks there. Continuing forward with why is my car not starting, and things to look for. There is a vacuum line that goes from that where the solenoids are for the actuators underneath the upper manifold. There's a vacuum line with an inline check valve that goes to the upper manifold. Usually has like a green and white check valve on it. Make sure that that hasn't become disconnected. You have a vacuum leak there. Speaking of other potential vacuum leaks, there's three more actual critical ones to look out for. If your intake system isn't going like mine from the fill neck to your catch can, and it's actually going from the fill or the intake oil fill to your throttle body, or your intake pipe right before the throttle body, make sure there's no cracks or anything in the lines. Same thing for the other two vacuum lines. Both of these lines serve two very important functions. One of these is going to be your jet air, or basically feeds air to the motor with the throttle position closed to maintain idle for the motor, and it routes behind the alternator. And after it routes behind the alternator, it goes, and you can actually see it on mine in a little bit, it comes out right here, and then it comes back around, catch can's in the way, and it goes into the lower manifold. Make sure, especially under boosted applications, that line can come off or gets old and starts to crack. Make sure that that line that goes and is the idle air control behind the alternator is secured. No cracks in it, because that can be a vacuum leak, cause idling issues, especially if the line's not connected. What ends up happening is, besides going lean because the air sensor is getting no air through it, but then the motor's getting air, so it's not injecting enough fuel into the engine. It's going to be a constant leak. So make sure that line is good, because it's going to throw off your airflow sensor really bad, and your system's going to start running lean. The other line actually goes to the plastic oil metering nozzle distribution block. Now, the reason why this line is important is because without this line, the oil metering system is a sealed system. And so what that does is the injectors go into the motor, and the oil injectors, what ends up happening is, the oil injectors, when the motor's going through the intake phase and those injectors are right there, the rotor phase turns, it opens up, it's pulling in air. There's no air going through those nozzles. They're sealed, they're capped off, and so then it's forcefully pulling oil through your oil lines. And I mean, yeah, you want oil in the engine, but if it's a sealed system, if it does not have, an atmosphere reference, it's just going to be siphoning oil out of your oil metering system, and it's going to be sucking tons of oil through it. So I mean, yeah, you're thinking, okay, good, great, extra lubrication. No, that's bad. You're fouling plugs. You're not letting the metering system run as it should. So you're going to want to make sure that your line is good. After you make sure that the line is good, hold on, this camera is dirty. Is that better? There we go. So after you make sure that the line is good, make sure that the plastic distributor is not damaged. Sometimes you can hear hissing, you'll spray some like brake fluid, and the engine will want to stumble. There could be a crack in that it's like a little rectangle. The vacuum line goes into the side of it, and then it's got 4 outlets for each oil injector. Make sure that that's good. And again, that's going to be specific for Series 1 Rx8. Series 2 Rx8 is going to have a different oil metering system. Similar, but still different. Now, going on to additional things. That's already a long video, I know, but hey, if you're here watching this video, it's because your car won't start and you're just trying to get some answers. So, bear with me. Right there, that little guy, your eccentric shaft position sensor. Make sure that it is clean. Make sure the plug is seated properly, the connector. It is critical that the spacing on the teeth stays consistent and that the sensor is not damaged, because right here, this flat spot, this is one of the points that the computer gets reference for a signal as far as where the motor is in rotation. So without this working properly, it's not going to know where to inject or at what point in rotation to inject the gasoline, and your car's not going to run, you're going to start. So when people talk about your ESS or your eccentric shaft sensor, we're talking about this down here right next to the crank. Make sure it's clean, make sure the plug's seated, make sure the connections are clean. That's going to be one of the more critical parts. If it's getting like a limp motor, acting strange, doesn't hurt to check your oil metering pump, check your oil metering pump connector. Mass airflow sensor. Check mass airflow sensor, make sure it's clean. That's one of the critical parts. With the regular oil fill going from here to your intake, sometimes there's where the system coughs up oil. That oil, especially when you get throttle close, typically those who know about airflow and fluid dynamics, close the throttle, there's going to be almost like a shock wave or buffer wave. It pushes stuff forward in the intake piping, and so all that garbage comes forward, especially with it being in such close proximity, and it dirties your airflow sensor. Big problem. So periodically, I like to do it at least every oil change. Check your airflow sensor, make sure that it's clean. If it's not clean, clean it. Use airflow sensor cleaner for this sensor only. Make sure the plug is seated properly. Check the O-ring on your airflow sensor. Make sure the O-ring is not damaged, because the sensor can be good, the sensor can be clean. If the O-ring on the sensor is damaged or missing, air can get through, and that's going to cause running issues. So that's critical. Whether it be a factory intake or aftermarket intake, make sure that all the clamps, everything is sealed so that you don't have a vacuum leak on your intake system. I have a modified Mazda speed, modified in the sense that the regular Mazda speed, when it gets to this point, same for the AEMs, it necks down, or it throttles down from 3.5 piping to 3.25 piping coming up through the front bumper. I didn't do that. I instead decided to keep with the 3.5 inch coming forward and put a 3.5 inch filter. This is all going to change when I finish the turbo install, but this is the filter that I got for the turbo, which is why it's here. And I was just checking to see how I liked it and make sure it didn't affect performance naturally aspirated before I went to forced induction and had even bigger problems. So I already covered the batteries in the trunk, so sorry we're not covering that here right now today. Got the throttle body's clean. This line that goes from the brake booster to the upper manifold, make sure that there's no damage in this line as well. That can cause a vacuum leak, that can cause running issues and starting issues. Fuel lines, make sure your fuel lines aren't leaking. Periodically check them for residue or buildup. Last thing you want is a nice hot rotary having something happen to one of your fuel lines. Gasoline gets doused all over it. Now you got a big old fire. Now you're in trouble going down the highway at 60 miles an hour, and instead of fireballs out the car, there's fireballs out the engine bay. Anyways, moving forward, ignition coils. This is one of the hot topics. Factory. Don't go with off-brand coils. I mean, yeah, cheaper coils are nice. No. Invest in a set of genuine Revision C Mazda coils. Okay? They're going to last a lot longer. They're a lot more dependable. And keep those installed on the car. Or go with one of the several, reputable companies that do aftermarket coil systems for the Rx8. Again, clearly making sure I say the word reputable companies. Okay? So the wires. So the wire color is important, making sure that the coil packs are in the right order. So we're going to go over that now. We've got coil 1, green. 2, that looks like brownish colored for the trigger wire. I'll say brown. You guys can see the picture. Your wires are probably going to look just as old and crummy. The third one back, it's hard to see a little bit. Let's see if I can get zoomed in on it a little bit. Zoom in. And that looks yellow to me. And the fourth one looks like it has a green stripe on it. I'll try to get exact colors later, or you can actually look it up. But hopefully with this you can see what is what. So right now you see in the far back, that's going to be the fourth coil. In front of that is third coil, and then coming over here, second coil and first coil. Now going forward, looking at the coils this way, people have different ignition coil wires. Some have different markings. Don't worry about the markings that are on these. What's important to know is, now that you know what color wire goes into each coil pack, to make sure that that is in proper order, you need to know which wire goes to which spark plug. This one, front rotor leading plug. Second one, front rotor trailing plug or top plug. Third one is going to be rear rotor leading plug or bottom plug. Fourth one is going to be rear rotor trailing plug or top one, however you want to look at it. So again, front leading, front trailing, rear trailing. Make sure that's where all of these go to. That's going to be very important. I don't have very good quality wires on here right now. I'm going to be switching out the wires. Wires are important to switch out. People are like, okay, I got new coil packs, I got new spark plugs. Wires are important too. Wires wear out. These things get hot. They build up resistance. That affects your spark. Change your wires. Maintain them. Same way you do the rest of the stuff on this car. What else? What else did we look at? Yeah, your spark plugs. Make sure they're not fouled. Make sure you're not flooding your motor. That's going to be important as well. Good battery. I guess we could take a look at the battery really quick. But I mean, those are the most of the things that come to mind. Again, checking your fuses, making sure you don't have a blown fuse. That's important. And it doesn't hurt to go ahead and check your oil level and everything else. Make sure you're not trying to start your car and you don't have any oil in the system, because that's just a bad day cranking it and you don't even have oil in the car. Okay, let's go into the trunk. My trunk is filthy. Ignore it, please. Okay. So, this is where my battery lies. It is a Deca 30 series battery. Made a little custom mount. I have it grounded in 2 points. One is to the driver's side strut tower, and the other goes underneath to the frame of the car, underneath the seats. Positive, just short run to a 200 amp circuit breaker, and then goes forward. I can show you the route that it goes in another video, but make sure your terminals are nice and secure and tight. Nothing's loose, nothing's wobbly. Make sure you have solid connections. If your battery's not strong enough, you're not going to start the car. And I think that's it. Let's close this gross ass trunk. God damn, I need to wash it. You are filthy. Ugh. I feel so bad. This looks so nasty. But yeah, so that should be the stuff related to whether or not your car can start or not. So we've looked over my stuff on my car. Everything's all right. I mean, at least I know everything's all right. Obviously, I didn't take off the manifold and stuff, but you guys get the picture. So theoretically, even though I just did I started the car and I drove it for just 10-15 seconds and shut it off, which is very ill-advised. I have a healthy ignition system. I have a healthy battery. I got good compression, healthy fuel system. Everything's good. I should be able to start the car without any problems. If your car's support systems are healthy, your airflow sensor is clean, your battery is good, if everything, fuel, ignition, everything's in great shape and your motor is healthy, you should not have issues with cold starts, even if you had a short drive. So and the check engine light is because I did the air pump delete, and instead of running the factory narrowband rear O2 sensor, I put the wideband in that bung for my AEM failsafe. So, and then look, it's cold motor. I'm gonna turn it off, and it should turn on again right now, no problem. See? Take care of your car. Take care of all the systems. We won't have any problems. See y'all later. Enjoy.